Shalom, Kahalayam La Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, Wahar Chakwarash, the blindness of the apostles, bishops, and elders of GMS who will learn this truth from, and salutations and blessings to you elect, starting with 144,000 on down. So, this is a lesson dealing with some history, pretty much asking the question, how did a lot of Israelites lose power? Or how did Israelites lose power in the medieval times or in the Dark Ages? And this is a question that I myself asked when I first learned that Israelites ruled during the Dark Ages. One aspect or one large factor is the Black Death or the Black Plague, which is two plagues, the bubonic and pneumonic plague, which is something you can look up. The numbers are pretty staggering. But the other aspect is a larger aspect, I would say, is civil wars, infighting among Jacs, okay, for blood feuds and ruling of territories, right, conquering more lands, right. And as time went on, Jacs divided in different versions of Christianity, okay. So this is from a page called realhistorywww.com, and this is going to be jumping around in the spirit. I'm not going to, there's no clear point to this because there's a lot of gaps that Esau has, meaning Esau, he'll take away a lot of history so you think you can't get it, He'll take away, you'll be getting to a point, a big point, and there'll be a gap in the bridge, right? You can't bridge that gap. You can't bridge that gap pretty much. You can't get the right information, but through the spirit you can, because we know that it was not you Edomites, right, you Caucasians that were in rule during the Dark Ages. You were the bottom feeders, you were the serfs, you were the wild men, okay, you were at the bottom. So it says during the medieval period, hundreds of racial and religious wars were fought, the 30 years war being the only one that the albinos will acknowledge was not a political war. Now that word albino, right, it goes back to when some of the first people actually that were called Alba, right, which that term albino goes back to Alba, were Roman saints, which were Israelites. And then later on, you had Scottish kings and different medieval kings who were called Alba or Alban, which pretty much, it meant white, but really what it emphasized was enlightened. Okay, so the true white or enlightened people were Israelites, people of a darker shade. Okay, and that's what Esau took to himself when he labeled himself as white people, as the pure, as the righteous, because it has a energetic connotation to it. Right? It says, in Germany, even though blacks and mulattoes continued to rule over the Holy Roman Empire for a time, true black power was broken by defeat during the 30 Years' War. The black survivors and prisoners of those wars would be rounded up and turned over to the British. Albino history being what it is lies, it is very difficult to determine exactly when black rule was broken in Britain, because as in Germany, blacks and mulattoes continued to rule, presumably as figureheads, right? And it is difficult because, as I said, a lot of history is broken. We can only speculate through the spirit, pretty much. So here's some more information. Nonetheless, the English civil wars, the ascension of Oliver Cromwell, and the fall of the House of Stuart, which the House of Stuart was the house that King James and his lineage came from. You had a James I, James II, James III, James V. It went on. It was a family lineage. And that House of Stuart was so important that when it was dethroned and it was overpowered, you had a Jacobite revolution or Jacobite civil war, where Israelites pretty much demanded that the Jacobites, which was the Stuarts, be put back in rulership. And that was another civil war that you can look up, the Jacobite civil wars, right? Those were Israelites at that time, and Edomites were coming up. Okay, and they already took over, and Israelites wanted that seat back. They couldn't get it back, and they didn't get it back, right? It says House of Stuart were critical to the fall of black rule in Britain, perhaps starting with Cromwell and continuing on for hundreds of years. The victorious albinos in Germany and Britain rounded up the black survivors of the wars and prisoners from those wars and shipped them off to North America and the Caribbean as indentured servitudes and slaves, perusing through shipping manifests from those times, producing proof of those activities. Right, and there's information from various time lineages. I'm not going to read that. I'm gonna keep going. Okay, now Thomas Cromwell. We're gonna go back to this devil. Okay, this is from Daily Telegraph Media Group Limited, January 2015. Main quote: "No one can be sure of the exact figure, but it is estimated that the destruction started and legalized by Cromwell amounted to 97% of the English art then in existence. Statues were hacked down, frescoes were smashed to bits, mosaics were pulverized, illuminated manuscripts were shredded, wooden carvings were burned, precious metalwork was melted down, shrines were reduced to rubble. This vandalism went way beyond a religious reform. It was a frenzy, obliterating the artistic patronymy of centuries of indigenous craftsmanship with an intensity of hatred for imagery," right, which the word icon means image, "and depicting the divine that has strong and resonant parallels today." So Cromwell was responsible for that, for a lot of that, right? Now, going back to the 30 Years' War, just to get the understanding of how intense this shit was, you had a 30 Years' War. Before this, I believe, you had a 100 Years' War, where like 40 to 50% of Israelites were just decimated, you know? So the wars kept coming and coming until the Black Death, which the Black Death caused 2/3 of Europe's population to perish. Then you had civil wars after it, which was part of the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' Wars is after the Black Death. Black Death started in 1325, 1350, right? So the 30 Years' War fought primarily in Central Europe between 1618 and 1648, was one of the most destructive conflicts in European history. An estimated 4.5 to 8 million soldiers and civilians died from battle, famine, or disease, while parts of Germany reported population declines of over 50%. Who do you think that was? Majority Israelites. Okay? Just to get a understanding. Now, this guy, Cromwell, I typed in, did Oliver Cromwell destroy icons? Yes, Oliver Cromwell was involved in the destruction of religious icons and imagery during the English Civil War and its aftermath. While not directly participating in every instance of iconoclasm, he was a key figure in the parliamentarian movement that actively targeted such items. Okay, so just to bring out some more history. Now here, this is dealing with various wars. At the end of the 100 Years' War, Black France, which had produced the Normans and the ancestors of Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor, the result, 50% of the population killed. At the end of the 30 Years' War, which had involved the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and his allies, the Papal Army, Spain, Portugal, Bavaria, against the insurgent albino forces from France, now under albino control, England, Russia, the Dutch, Sweden, Transylvania, Hesse-Kassel, and the Palatinate, please remember this name, Saxony, Brandenburg, and Denmark switched alliances. The result, 40% of the population killed. At the end of the English Civil Wars, right, which pitted black Britons against albino Britons, the result, England suffered a 3.7% loss of population, Scotland a loss of 6% population, Ireland lost 41% of its population. The Glorious Revolution, which pitted albino Dutch and British against black British. The Jacobite Wars, which pitted albino British against black British, who wanted the return of a monarchy, the House of Stuart. Right? That's why during the time of King James, you had, I'm talking about the King James who authorized, right, the translation of the 1611 Bible, the King James Version, right, the 6th of Scotland, the 1st of England, right? He was going to be taken out by an assassin, by a Jesuit by the name of Guy Fawkes. Okay, there's a movie made about him. I forget his name at the current moment. It has that bitch, Natalie Portman. V for Vendetta. That's what it's called. V for Vendetta. It's loosely based upon that. That guy, Guy Fawkes, was a Jesuit assassin, and he was caught pretty much lining up the castle of King James with bombs. And when he was caught, he was asked, why did you want to do it? You know? And he was sent by the Catholics in Rome. It's like, not in Rome, in Spain. At that time, you already had the Borgias ruling for years. The Borgias were from the late 1400s. This was in the 1600s already. You had Edomites in Rome, it's like in Italy and in Spain already. And they said, look, Guy Fawkes said, I wanted to blow you back to your Scottish mountains, because he was a Scotsman. That House of Stuart. Svart, that's what it goes back to, dark skin. Right? So the Jacobite Wars, the result, unknown number killed. Note, Scotland had become a center of black power. While the loss of 6% of its population is terrible, it pales when compared to what happened in Ireland, 41%. Right? Scotland, the Jacobite risings brought repeated British government efforts to curb the Scottish clans, culminating after the 1746 Battle of Culloden with brutal repression. The Act of Proscription of 1746, incorporating the Dress Act, required all swords to be surrendered to the government and prohibited the wearing of tartans and kilts. The Tenures Abolition Act 1660 ended the feudal bond of military service, and the Heritable Jurisdictions Act removed the virtually sovereign power the chiefs held over their clan. The Disarming Act of 1746 and the Clan Act made ineffectual attempts to subdue the Scottish Highlands, and eventually troops were sent in. Government garrisons were built or extended in the Great Glen at Fort William, Killowim, and Fort George in Inverness, and as well as barracks at Ruthven, Bernera, and Inversned, linked to the south by the Wade roads. These had the effect of limiting organizational travel and choking off news, and further isolated the clans. Nevertheless, conditions remained unsettled for the whole decade. Okay, now again, this is just history going into, right, how Israelites could lose power, pretty much, because this was a question when I came in the truth. I said, how did Israelites lose power? I understood the Black Death, but then there was so much Israelites everywhere. Germany, you got to think, Central Europe, England, Ireland, Scotland, France, Spain, Russia, all these different places, the Netherlands, Dutchlands, right? The Deutschlands. It says here, thankfully, as is often the case, ordinary people did not know that one day blacks were not supposed to have existed in Europe. So people like Thomas Hobbes, while suffering through the English interregnum of Oliver Cromwell, longed for the days of his black kings like Charles. And so he wrote a book extolling the virtues of having a divine black king. Now, this is The Face of King Charles the First of England, House of Stuart. Now, mind you, Charles II was known as the Black Boy. And you still have a inn um, there in England, right? The Black Boy Inn, named after King Charles II. He was known as the Black Boy. When you go on Wikipedia and ask why was Charles II called the Black Boy, they'll tell you some bogus information about his hair was very black, his eyebrows, or whatever the hell, whatever the hell his eyes were really black. No, he was known as the Black Boy because you know why. I don't even have to say it, right? He wrote a book called The Face of. So this is the book Leviathan. Okay, written by Thomas Hobbes and published in 1651. Later supporters of the Black Stuarts were called Jacobites because why? Really, King James, his name wasn't James because during his time, the letter J was invented a little after him. There was no J, so his name was really I. And really, if you want to be technical, it was Yaaikwab or Jacob. It wasn't James. The word James goes back to Jacob. Look it up. Right? James goes back to Jacob. Yaaikwab. And J didn't exist. J is a I with a hook on it. And the dot, crossed out. Okay? So Leviathan, or the matter, form, and power of a commonwealth, ecclesiastical and civil, commonly simply Leviathan, is a book written by Thomas Hobbes and published in 1651. Its name derives from the biblical Leviathan. The work concerns the structure of society and legitimate government and is regarded as one of the earliest and most influential examples of social contract theory. The publisher was Andrew Crooke, partner in Andrew Crooke and William Cook. Leviathan ranks high as a classical Western work on statecraft comparable to Machiavelli's The Prince, and is one of a number of related works incident upon the crisis of the English state framework of the time. In Leviathan, which was written during the English Civil War, Hobbes argues for a social contract and rule by an absolute sovereign. He wrote that chaos or civil war situations identified with the state of nature and the famous motto bellum omnium contra omnes, the war of all against all, could only be averted by strong central government. And this is the fake image of Charles I, right? The albino fake image of Charles I. And this is the original. When you type in Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes, this is the image you'll get. This guy's a light-skinned Jake. Okay? When you go here, this is the modern image that they show you. Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. This is an Edomite. Okay? As freely admitted by the albinos, the prisoners of those wars were shipped off to the United States and the Caribbean islands as indentured servitudes. They just don't admit that they were blacks, or that those wars were really race wars, not religious wars. Over time, all black survivors were shipped off to the United States and the Caribbean islands as indentured servitudes, and Europe was thus cleansed of all blacks. As a reminder, the British census of 2001 proclaimed 0 native blacks. For those who are shocked and say, that is just too incredible to believe, and how could American blacks not know? As we know, American blacks were taught that they were all came from Africa. Sound familiar? And we know that's not true because Jacs were over here already in America. Okay, Jacs were having transatlantic trade. Okay, not slavery. Transatlantic merchandise. There was a trade for really thousands of years, if you want to be technical, from Solomon's days. After Solomon, the Carthaginians went to America as well. So there's a lot of trade, man. It says actually there are some American blacks who have by way of professional genealogists traced their families back to Europe, right? Not the ancestry sites or websites. Probably some from the free states have managed to escape their families or have managed to keep their families' histories alive in family Bibles. But there is nothing incredible about what happened at all. It is actually quite common. conquered and or enslaved people, having no institutional means of keeping their histories, relying only on oral recounts, while at the same time having their masters teach them that they want them to know quickly lose all memories of their ancestral history. The albinos do it to blacks all the time. Don't forget, they want to claim that they are original humans and native to the places that they conquered. Here are a few examples. So pretty much this goes into Revelation 20 and 1. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil, which is Edomites. You had the stronghold of Greece and Rome, and during the before Septimius Severus, you were losing your power already through the Praetorian Guard, who became of men who came in as gladiators and senators in various positions of high held positions. They took you over, right? They took you over. You had the seven good emperors, I believe, or the five good emperors, if I'm not mistaken. Those were Israelites. You had Israelite emperors before Septimius Severus, right? And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan. Devil means deceiver, Satan means adversary, right? And bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years shall be fulfilled, and after that he must be loosed a little season. And he was loosed. He was loosed through wars, civil wars, plagues, serving in your military, ranking up as noblemen, as knights, becoming a fucking knight, having a dynasty, a family, and a coat of arm, a crescent over you, Jake, marrying your woman. Because you know how Jake is. After a while, he gets relaxed, man. Jeshurun rocks fat. You fucking niggas, man. Anyway, Kahalayam la Yahweh Shalom to the elect. I hope you're edified.